Ryan Ray and Ben Samuels present Bring in the Closers, a podcast on making deals and doing business.
Welcome to another edition of Bring in the Closers. Ryan Ray here solo for the most part today. I will bring in my guest in a minute. But until then, just want to let you know I will be down at NAPE this week. If you are in the NAPE area, I will be there, be on the floor some, have some meetings set up. I'm excited about that. Thank you guys for tuning in. No new reviews to read this week, but we look forward to those. Be sure to rate and review the show in iTunes. My guest this week is a man who needs a lengthy introduction, but we don't have time for it. Ben Samuels. Ben, it's good to have you on the program today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing amazing. Ryan, I will tell you, since we talked about this, I think like 3 weeks ago when I was at 8 Connections, 100% in a week or two. So I'm moving in the right direction. If you haven't reached out to me on LinkedIn yet, please do so. I try to add some value every once in a while to the feed. Try to put some good stuff out there for discussion. Every once in a while, I like to kind of poke the bear. And then if you're not on LinkedIn, you're obviously not seeing when Ryan takes me to task, what seems like daily. So yeah, if you want to be into that, jump on.
And if you're new to the show, Ben is obviously the co-host, but I try to give him a hard time as much as humanly possible. Ben, big week this week, and, well, we had a guest scheduled, didn't we? I mean, I put it out there on LinkedIn that we had a guest, but as you can see, that's why I brought you on as a guest, because, well, the real guest isn't here. Is it going to be here? There should be here at this moment as we're recording this. And you use a term a lot called set the expectation. And I feel like me and you have set the expectation for what we should expect from Nate, which should mean that we're not disappointed that there's no guest today, but the audience members might not have gotten it. So let's reset that expectation that when we go out and say that we have a guest coming on, that means that Nate, not Ben or Ryan, has gone out and scheduled the guest. And so if the guest doesn't show up, there's only one person to blame, right?
Beep, beep, beep. In case you can't tell, that's the truck being backed over Nate. I'm not going to pile on because he's not on my payroll. So I'm going to let y'all, the two of y'all, figure that out. But I'm looking forward to having the unnamed guest here on when we're able to reschedule, and hopefully by the time 2020 rolls around, Nate will be up to speed and get this thing going. But hey, we're all trying to put it together piece by piece.
Yeah, well, it's okay. So
we can't all have recorded 400 plus podcasts and have that kind of depth of experience. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You got to give us some leeway, man.
Wow. See, why are you on Nate's side? I don't understand this. Like, why are you on his side?
You don't want me to answer that on there.
We didn't have a guest scheduled for today, but he got the time zones mixed up. So anyways, so he will be rescheduled. No worries. It happens to the best of us, which means that Ben didn't get to prepare for today's show like he'd like to. So if he's a little off, I'm setting the expectation now. Me, as a Jedi Master podcaster, I am prepared, as always, to talk nonsense for as long as possibly needed. With that being said, it is NAPE week. We will be going down to NAPE. Ben and I will be down there. I'm going tomorrow night, I believe, is when I get to town. Ben, when do you get to town? Tomorrow night as well? Tomorrow afternoon?
Flying in midday tomorrow.
Okay, so be down there for some meetings. So if you're down there, hit us up. Love to meet with you guys if we can. Which leads me to my first question. How in the world do you prepare for a conference? I've got some thoughts on this. My perspective kind of morphs over time, but I'm just curious. How do you go about I know you like things about conferences that I don't like particularly. So I'm curious. How do you go through prepare for a conference?
First, I think it depends on what the goal is. Am I going to the conference because I'm interested in the material being covered by the talks, and am I interested in actually learning about something new, whether that be some kind of new technology, or maybe I'm going to something like when I went to ERTech last month in Denver. The reason I went to that conference is because the oil field technology space is not necessarily something that I'm that I have a great finger on the pulse of. And so I wanted to go there and just kind of poke around and see what was available, see what was going on in the field. If I'm looking at a water or minerals conference, that's obviously a much more, as I like to say, in my fairway. And so I'm generally coming into that with a game plan of, am I currently shopping or marketing assets for clients that I think there's going to be buyers in the room for that. If that's the case, then I'm going to be preparing pitch decks and data to be provided, and kind of get a hit list of some of the groups that are that I think will be in attendance or that I know will be in attendance, and try to interface with those groups directly. If it's something where I'm just kind of trying to see what the market is like, or kind of put myself out there, I'm really just in focusing on, a lot of times I'll send LinkedIn messages prior, just kind of as a softball introduction, and then be able to follow that up. And so it really kind of depends. I've gone to a number of these now, and I'm probably at one conference or another, once or twice a month. And so I've been doing that for years now. And so, you kind of get in the habit of, there's going to be the same people that you see, and it's always good to circle back with those guys. But I don't like to go to the conferences. I'm not there to, let me say it a different way. I'm not at the conferences just to kind of network and quote unquote schmooze and go out afterwards and drink. That's not my scene. I'm going to those with actionable. Here's what I'm trying to get done. And so then it creates a lot of follow up on the back end. But we can talk about that as well.
So how do you, you mentioned you might try to, reach out to some folks online or whatnot to prepare yourself. Obviously the speaker list will be there. As it gets closer, various companies will start to advertise on some level on LinkedIn or whatnot that they're going to be there. Do you have a kind of a method to the madness? Are you looking for sponsors and then going, okay, well, what, people might be interested in the sponsor? Like, how are you breaking that down so that you can make sure you're identifying the right people outside of the folks that you, like, as you mentioned, that you're going to know that they're going to be there on a regular basis?
I think it falls into two buckets. I mean, one bucket is, either I've done, deals with that group before, or there's already a connection, and we're, talking about a new deal that I may be working on, or they may be working on, or, it's a new contact and I'm really just trying to make the connection and reach out. If it's the second one, if it's a new connection, I'm just trying to reach out. I think about it very similarly to what we talked about last episode and last week about being able to provide value on the front end and not ask much of them, but really be prepared to kind of lay out on the line, or lay out, this is what I do. This is where I think that we could come together. If that's of interest, let's have a conversation. And really, at these conferences, a lot of times, it's you get 2 or 3 minutes at most. I mean, it's very quick, high level. Here's the business card. Here's what I do. Let's talk after the conference. Many times, there are some conferences where it's not this way, but there's a lot of times where it's not. You're not having in-depth 30, 45-minute, hour conversations with these groups. It's really more just about kind of checking in and touching base. And then if there's a more substantive conversation to have, generally you set up like a coffee at the conference, out offline, or a follow-up call the next week or something like that.
So one of the things about NAPE that I'm curious your thoughts on, and I've said this before, one of the reasons I like going to NAPE is you can walk the floor. And if you walk the floor, let's say you can't walk it obviously in 5 minutes, but you walk the floor 2 times a day for 2 days or something like that, morning, afternoon, mid-morning, afternoon, whatever. Not when the sessions are going on, but when the folks are out there, you can kind of walk the floor and you can see what booths have a lot of people around them and which ones are empty. And now that's not a direct indicator of what may or may not be going on, but it does give you some insight that there is a lot of action at this booth, and you can start to categorize them. Okay, where are these assets at? Who has them? Is there multiple booths that have a lot of people with these same type of assets in the same areas? Especially if you're looking at something that maybe not in the news, if you will, or you might see booths that have stuff that's not in the news, or there's no one ever stopping by. So NAPE, I'm curious about your perspective on that, because NAPE kind of might give you some insight of what people are looking for, whereas other conferences, it's very vendor heavy, and it's kind of hard to get a read just by walking the floor. I feel like NAPE, you can get a read, whereas you can't at others. Does that make sense? And would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, NAPE is really NAPE has a reputation, and deservedly so, as a conference where a lot of deals get done. There's a ton of deals that get done at the conference. It's a main focus for a lot of groups to package minerals or non-op or something like that up and use 2, 3, 4, 6 months prior to NAPE to get all of that together and then sell it at NAPE, and that's a business model for a lot of people. And so one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking. One of the things that I do the very first time that I walk into NAPE on the first day, I do a very quick walkthrough of the entire floor. I try to go from one end to the other just to get a sense of, okay, who's in this side of the room, who's in this side of the room, kind of get the lay of the land. But also to your point, where are the big pockets of people? Where is the noise coming from? Where is the activity? Because that will kind of key you in on some other things as well. Because I think it's important. And one of the things that I didn't mention before, in my answer before is, I think it's important to come in with a game plan, but be willing and able to kind of deviate from that and find if there's something interesting or something like that. Don't feel like you have to be regimented in a certain system. And so it's really valuable to kind of keep your eyes on a swivel or keep your head on a swivel and figure out what's going on for sure.
The other thing I think that when you're prepping for a conference is to kind of know what the booths are. And so we talked about from NAPE standpoint, but obviously you went to the conference in Denver a few weeks ago, so I'm curious about that one. But one of the things I've learned and why I'm not as big on conferences maybe as I used to be is because a lot of times conferences are packed with other salespeople, business development people, and that's all it is. So it's a lot of vendors who don't really have a ton of overlap, or if they do, they're not using it at that conference to really benefit themselves. And so you're walking by and you spend a lot of time talking to a lot of salespeople who are trying to sell you stuff. NAPE is trying to sell you stuff, but it's a different feel because of just the nature of it's not a transactional type vendor or product. It's actually you're trying to sell some acreage or whatever the case may be. How do you to figure out when you're looking at conferences, okay, am I going to walk into the room and it's just going to be a bunch of salespeople and that's going to be hard to really get past that front line, or is it going to be the movers and shakers there?
So I look at that a little bit differently, and I think it's probably because of how I run the business that I do and where I fit into that picture. And what I mean by that is when I'm walking into a conference, whether it be NAPE or more technical conference, I'm going in there with the mentality of who do I need to know in this room? What can they provide of value to the people that I networked with and my connections? Because Zahav Resources or any of the other companies that I own, we're not looking to purchase product. We're not looking to take on vendors for the most part. That's not the role that we fill. I'm more of in a mentality of having open ears to figure out who I can pick out of NAPE and put them together with a group that I'm already working with, or where can I find the value add to put the pieces together? So it's kind of the same concept of what we've been talking about episode to episode since the beginning of the podcast, but just at a different level, because I'm really going in there. And so I'm okay with hearing a sales pitch. I'm okay with getting bombarded with sales guys, quote unquote, because I know that if there's something actionable, then my next step is to get to the decision maker. Because so the guy, the sales guy is providing a service and giving me something to chew on. But I mean, I find that as a value add. I don't really think that that's a negative.
Okay, let's. Final thing on that is on conferences. What percentage of conferences do you attend, mainly for the speakers, the presentations, versus what's on the booth side of things? Or is it mainly just it's just kind of either I'll go, no go based upon what I'm seeing generally, from the booth inside and the speaker side?
I think it's a good question. Really the way I think about that is there's a lot of times where I say I'll go to a conference. There's a lot of times where I'll go to the city in which a conference is taking place and kind of be in the area of the convention center where it's happening, but not actually go into the floor, because all I'm trying to do at that conference is meet people that are going to be in the building and kind of network with people that are in that industry. And, whether it be that I don't have the time or I don't find the need to actually go to the conference. And so it's not a must-have for me. I will look at most agendas when they come out of a conference that I'm looking at, and if it's valuable, I'll go. If it's not, I'm not. It's not like I'm hell bent on going, because a lot of these conferences are $500, $700, $1,000 a pop. So it adds up if you're going to every single one. If you're just going to go, if you're going for a reason, then absolutely, I think that there's massive value add. But if you're just kind of going to check the box of, I was at that conference, I think a lot of times it's just valuable being in Houston. I know a lot of people that go to Houston for NAPE, quote unquote, but don't actually go to the show. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah.
And it's interesting because early on you said that, you go to a conference and you'll kind of see the same crowd of people that you see at stuff. And there's some value And I'm not sure if it's worth $700, 3 or 4 times a month, but there is some value at just being seen at the events, walking the floor, saying hey to the guy that you saw, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, even if there's not a direct correlation, or a business deal to be had, just because, we always, no one that I know likes really doing a lot of cold calls if they don't have to. They prefer the warm ones. And so the more, if the budget is a great concern that you brought up, but there is something that if you're there working in the room smartly, because you don't know 3 months, 6 months, or a year down the road, that person may change jobs or they may expand the portfolios, and it's not a cold, it's a warm lead now.
Absolutely. So I'm curious what you would say to this, or how you would answer this. What would you say? What's the equivalent? So if you meet somebody at NAPE one time, face-to-face, first time you've met, but you're meeting face-to-face and you have some number of minute conversation, how many cold calls or how many phone calls to that same lead, if you hadn't met them, do you think that equals? How many times do you have to pick up the phone and cold call somebody to equate to one just couple minute conversation face-to-face?
It could be a lot because they may not answer your phone call or respond to your email. We talked about Robert Martinez on a few weeks ago. If you're meeting someone like Robert at NAPE, versus trying to get into his door through emails or phone calls, that can go a long way. So no, I think that's a great way to look at it, is that you have kind of potentially, if you can make a good first impression, cut out a lot of process, because it's not only the phone, let's say you do cold call them and you talk to them the first time. They're getting a lot of vendors call them, a lot of business people like ourselves calling them. So even if you do get on the phone, they might not remember you. At least here you exchange a card, you can follow up an email. And one of the things I always like to do when I'm meeting someone is try, especially if it's important, try to either write down a quick note or say something in the conversation that I can reference in the email later, because that's of importance as well. Okay.
It's so important for people to hear that. That is so critical. I can't tell you, Ryan, how many conferences I went to until I quote unquote figured that out. I can't tell you how many business cards I have, and I have actually a stack sitting right next to me here. I can't tell you how many business cards I have that I have no note, no context, no nothing. So I don't know where I met them, what we talked about, what their interests were. No, none of those things. And so the only way I have that is if I followed up with a generic follow-up response email and like, hey, I saw you last week at the conference, let's talk. But that rings totally hollow. And so I probably almost always default to just not following up, which may even be a worse thing. But I don't want it on me that I know that we talked, but I don't remember what you look like. I barely remember your name. I've got your business card, but I met 600 other people this week, and so who knows. Whereas, recently, and I say recently, probably over the last couple of years, I've gotten in a habit of, and it might actually be rude, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but a lot of times as I'm talking to someone, I will take out a pen and on the back of their business card, be writing down notes as they're talking to me so that I don't forget. And I think, sometimes people will probably be like, what in the world is he doing? But that allows me to then go back after the conference and actually have things to talk about. But also, I think that's a differentiator because especially if you're listening to this podcast, by the way, and you're in a sales role, make sure to do this because that in and of itself, I think, is a differentiator. It could get you into some doors that you might not be able to get into. If people know that you've heard them and that they're being listened to, that in and of itself is such a rapport builder. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's a bad sign as well. In fact, I almost know that someone's going to contact me when they write on the back of their business card. Like I know, okay, I'm hearing from that person. So it almost signals, hey, this person's going to contact me. I got to be prepared to remember what they told me because they're going to do it. And it doesn't mean I always will, but if I see them pull the card out, start writing, I kind of I got to get really locked in now. This isn't just a normal conversation. We're actually doing something. A few things that I've tried before. I have a few strategies in general just to try to get people off of business outside that world, that helps me relate with them or understand things. In sports is something I really like. And so it's easy. If I can get someone talking about sports and I can figure out your favorite team, odds are, unless it's like cricket or something like that, I can pretty much talk at a, 30,000 foot level about just about any sports here. So if I can find out where you went to college or whatever, I can, we can talk about sports, which then gives me something to remember them by because that's important as well. And of course, there's a lot of Aggies in Texas and Longhorns, and so it's kind of a differentiating thing. But I like to, because I got to have something to reference is other than those 37 acres in Midland County that everyone asked you about. So do you try to get something a little bit more personal? I say personal, but not about the asset itself. Do you have a kind of a strategy or technique that you will deploy that you can kind of repeat the process that allows you to mass talk to people. That gives you an easy point of reference if you can, when you go back to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the introduction process. I try to kind of, in my intro, and I think I even did this. If you listen back to my intro on episode 1, I kind of have an elevator speech of an intro of myself that I give, more often than not. And it gives, like, I'm from Boston, or I went to school in Boston. I'm a Red Sox fan. It gives like a bunch of different things so that the person can kind of key in on any of that, and then we can have something to talk about. And so I think I've kind of just trained myself, or I've refined that to the point where I have a number of like things that they can key in on, and then I take their lead. So whatever they latch onto, I think I did that with you. And the first thing that you and I had in common was the Red Sox, and we talked about that. And so that was like in my lead up to like having the conversation. And so, to that point, I think it's valuable to kind of think through how you can best present yourself and introduce yourself that gives people like the invitation to engage. Because a lot of times I find that, if I give, or if I hear somebody give me a very dry intro of like, hey, my name is Jamie, and I work for X company, how's it going today?
Right.
That doesn't give me anything to go on. And so then a lot of times that conversation will die, or I'll start talking to somebody else. But you can have a really good, you can make a serious connection with somebody in 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not talking about a long time here. So yeah.
The final thing on NAPE in general, I'm just curious your thoughts on this. Now, we are, for the listeners who will be at NAPE, we are going as media. So when we're on the NAPE grounds, we will be there strictly as Bring in the Closers media, talking to folks about the podcast and deals, but we won't be doing any business that is part of being media. Now, once we leave the grounds, well, we might burn the place to the ground. But inside the building, we will be there as media. But and I learned this lesson the first time I went to NAPE as media. When I went to NAPE and I walked up to someone's booth who had whatever acreage for sale wherever, I said, "Hey, I'm Ryan Ray, Texas Oil and Gas Podcast. Kind of my show, da da da." He said, "Okay, great." And then basically stopped talking to me. And then the next person I went to was the same thing. And one of the things I learned very quickly was at NAPE, they're trying to literally sell this thing. And unlike a vendor conference, the prospective buyer is on my side of the table. So if I'm sitting there talking to you and I'm not interested in buying, the buyer could walk past because he sees that you're clogged up. So knowing the floor and how the floor works is also important. So when we're at NAPE, or when I'm at NAPE and I'm there as not as the owner of R Square Global, but if I'm there as a media member, I'm going to be very respectful of people's time. I'm not going to be bogging their booth down. It's going to be quick. It's going to be short. Now, if I was there as a someone who's trying to negotiate deals and whatnot, I would have a lot different tactics. So understanding where you're at in the conference, who's on the other side of the table, and how they're thinking about you is a difference. Because if you're at a conference that's really vendor heavy and they're trying to sell to people, those conferences are sometimes lightly attended by operators and company men, so they're willing to sit there and talk to you. But NAPE, and the guy wouldn't be disrespectful. I just understood it. He was hoping that a buyer was going to walk by, and here I was taking up his time.
Yeah, absolutely. Know your place. Know what. Again, I think it goes back to know what you're trying to accomplish, right? And so, if you're a PLRM or other, business student, and you're going to NAPE to try to find a summer internship, just know that you're going to need to be on point, quick, have a resume in hand, and make that a quick transition, or just find where you are in the room and act accordingly. But yeah, absolutely. That is. NAPE is again, like I said before, NAPE is a conference where a lot of deals get done, and so that's where the primary focus is.
Okay. Now, with that being said, we talked a lot about conferences, which is a lot of in-person meetings. We talked about prepping for that, but there's been a lot of talk, at least between me and you offline, about this idea of how valuable is the in-person meeting today. Obviously, I think it is valuable. We can't negate that, but with stuff like we're using Zoom conference service right now. If Zoom wants to sponsor the show, please hit us up. But we're using Zoom conference service right now, which means that we can see each other. We could use FaceTime or WhatsApp or a lot of other service, Skype. We could do that to get the video, the face-to-face, if you will. Obviously phone, text, email, things like that are available. Ben, are we to the point to where the face-to-face is not as valuable as it used to be because we can get face-to-face other ways, or is it no, the face-to-face is still so important we should be striving for those types of meetings?
think that's lots to do with context. For a first meeting to establish rapport and establish a connection, I think face-to-face is unbelievably invaluable. I think there's no substitute whatsoever. I think the ability to connect with someone at a really core and meaningful level is exponentially greater face-to-face as it is over the phone or any other medium. That being said, once you've established that trust and that relationship and that communication, I think, like when you and I talk on the phone or text or email or on Zoom, I don't feel any more connection with you one way or the other. Or even when we're face-to-face, I don't necessarily, there's not, a lot of value to that we couldn't have offline somewhere. But if I'm just establishing a relationship, or if it was with a client, or the context of the relationship also matters. And so yes, face to face is unbelievably invaluable in this day and age. There's ways to kind of work around that and mitigate that with people that you already have established connections with. But getting out there, and that's something that's really valuable. I mean, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago about the 2 or 3 minute meeting versus the how many cold calls is it going to take. It's just about having that interpersonal connection.
So I've thought about this some, and I go back and forth on it, because when I'm on the phone with someone talking to them, unless it's someone like yourself who I've got a pretty good rapport with, but if I'm on the phone with someone, I'm kind of trying to be aware of constantly reading the phone call to see, do I need to end this call so this other person doesn't have to, right? You're laughing at me. You're laughing at me. Don't laugh at me. I open myself up, and you just punch me right in the heart, man.
I'm not laughing at you, but I know I'm appreciative of the fact that you're so self-aware that you said that, and I didn't have to bring it up, because I find it hilarious, and I'm gonna minorly throw you under the bus here. I absolutely find it hilarious. There will be times where Ryan and I are on a call with another group, and we're listening to like an initial pitch, and I'll start, at some point at the quote unquote end of the conversation. And the reason I say quote unquote is because when Ryan decides that it's time to wrap up the conversation, I'll get texts that say, "All right, who's pulling the ripcord?" Or hey, when are we getting off this thing? And then it's usually on me to actually pull that ripcord and move us off the conversation. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you, but I just love the fact that, like I said, I love the fact that you're so self-aware that you know that you do it and it's with intent. I love it.
I'm still not sure if I got ran over by the bus where I was given an attaboy, or maybe you ran me over and screamed attaboy as the tires rolled over me slowly. I'm not sure what happened there.
Hey man, it's an art.
It's an art. But, when you're in the room with someone, I feel like you can gauge that pretty well. So, whereas when you're on the phone with them, it's a little bit tougher. So yeah, that's even on this medium right here. If you had a lot of video conferences scheduled, it's very much regimented. Hey, 15 minutes, which kind of can speed up. You can get that in person as well. I'm not trying to negate that. I don't know. Just to me, I wish business was easier to be done over these types of mediums, but at least I feel that pressure. Maybe I'm the only one who feels that pressure of, hey, when you're on the phone, when email and text are a little bit different. When you're on the phone or on a Skype or whatever, it's there's almost this urgency to get things done rather than sit down and kind of relax. Maybe I'm crazy here. Am I the only one who feels that?
No, not at all. I think there's different trigger points for everybody. I think that there have been times where you and I have been on a phone call and you've been ready to wrap up, but I had 3, 4, 5 more questions, and I could have kept going. I think there's also something to be said for. And I found this with a number of different partners that I've worked for in the past. I think everybody kind of has a different appetite for what's to be discussed when on a call. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of times where I may have, on an intro call, I want to do these 9 things, but you only want to do like 6 of them, which is totally fine. There's not a right or wrong.
Sure.
And so if I'm trying to get those other 3 things accomplished, but that's not on your radar for introduction call number 1, you're probably ready to pull the ripcord, 15, 20 minutes before I am, right? Because we haven't gotten there. Whereas there's some times where, where I'll, depending on the conversation, if there's a call that I just need bullet points and I just need like a couple of action items, I'm okay with like an intro call lasting. I've had introduction calls for assets, with a new group that I've never talked to before last like 10 or 12 minutes, including rapport, if I only needed to get like a high level. But there have been others where it's taken like 2 hours. I mean, so it really just kind of depends. what do you think about that? Because like I said, you definitely seem to have a different appetite for kind of what's to be discussed when and the flow of that. So how do you come at that from?
Yeah, and as I hear you talk about this, I'm trying to think of some of those times that we've had those and try to gauge what I was thinking, and I don't fully remember all of it right now.
As one I can point out to, we had a call with somebody that we met at the Produce Water Conference, and then somebody else in Dallas, and we were talking about something that's a little bit outside your fairway, hot tapping the pipeline.
Yeah. So for me, it's. I guess, and maybe this is, boy, we're opening up do we need to get the counseling table out here, the chair, when I was a little boy?
I'm going to put, no, actually, I didn't tell you, next week I'm going to put a chair, like a long couch right there. We're going to go full counselor session.
Full counselor session. Yeah, I guess on some level, I do think, to your point, I have had really long introduction calls. I kind of try to presume this on some level. A, that people are busy. B, that they've got other things to do. And C, that my tendency is to talk more than they want to talk. So I try to operate under that paradigm. You're pointing at me. The listeners can't see this. So I don't know if you're being sarcastic or serious here.
Actually, that's a good question. I don't think I've asked you that before. Can the listeners see when I'm pointing at you, but you're talking?
No, they can't.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, I can change that where they can, but as it's set up right now, they can't.
No, it's okay. No, that's good. The reason I stopped you is because it's interesting that you say that, because my experience with you thus far is the opposite. I think my experience with you thus far is that you seem to be ready to get off the call significantly quicker than most other groups are, or you seem to be the one that's like, get the antenna up before even, a lot of times I am, because I candidly, I think that I have kind of a quick trigger for that. I think that there's times where I've reached the point of like, okay, I've now heard everything that's going to be useful for me today. Let's move this along. But I think that you have even a quicker trigger. So it's just interesting to hear you say that.
So I guess you're agreeing with me, is what you're saying, long-windedly.
I'm always long-winded, number one. I always agree with you. You are an endless fountain of good ideas. Oh,
good gosh. Yeah, they can't see you, but they can hear your phone going off every 30 seconds. Oh, shot fired in the middle of the show. Sorry. Let's continue on. Yeah, there's a bus somewhere coming for you. Nate, please leave that in.
In that case, did you hear the Star Wars theme song go off a few minutes ago?
No, I just heard the ding dings and stuff, so it's okay.
It's on right. It's on
we set the expectation for low quality content here already. It's okay. Yeah, so that's me. And part of that though, and we can I'll kind of leave this here and we can delve offline, or the listeners if they want us to circle us back. Part of this is a lot of the time when I was doing sales was with people who did not want to talk very long because they're getting, they're out there running projects, things like that. So part of that's probably ingrained in me where, hey, I've got 2 to 5 minutes and they're going to get off the phone. They're going to tell me to get off the phone, and so I'm trying to make sure I'm getting things done very, very efficiently, very fastly.
So let me move the conversation into a different kind of segment of communication. I'm curious how you would address this, because since you said that, I find this to happen a lot with me. Okay, so let's move away from the introduction. So you've now met this person, maybe you've done a deal, but you're in, you have the trust, you have the relationship already established. I find a lot of times, and I think you and I see this very similarly, so you and I can connect on this, but there will be times where I'll pick up the phone, and when the person answers, I'll just launch into, hey, I'm working on X, Y, or Z. I'm looking, and they say, yeah, how's your day going? What's going on? And I'm like having to backtrack of like, oh yeah, everything's cool, whatever, and like kind of revert back into rapport. Where do you, to your point, I'm similarly of the same mind. When someone has called me or when I've called someone, I want to take up as little as time as possible, but be effective. But at the same time, continue to build that relationship, right? And so it's not trying to cut people off, but how do you balance that between, if you're talking to somebody and you're in the middle of a deal, and I'm not talking about like Will or Nate or Josh or any of those guys, but like maybe like a vendor or something like that, or a client, how do you kind of address that?
So I'm going to tell you how I think I address it, and you tell me if this has been your experience or not, because I'll catch me off guard here. If a client or an unknown person calls, I try to answer, say, this is Ryan. this is Ryan. Okay. Which is very much the, for making sure you got the right person, whatever, this is Ryan, here it is. Trap more of a business, if you will. I heard that when I was young. I always liked the guy who said it. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. So if it's that type of call, unless it's a client that we're really good friends with, it's going to be, this is Ryan. That's usually how I answer it right then.
What about the reverse? What about outbound?
If I'm calling them, yeah. So if I'm calling a client, it's going to depend on how busy I think they are. That's really going to be the gauge, and how good of friends we are. Because sometimes I've called clients and I've misgauged that. I'm like, hey man, how's it going? And I'm just trying to maybe not start off business, just try to get the rapport thing down. And they're like, I'm really busy. What's up? I'm like, ugh. So I try to be careful on that. Maybe I'll start off with something respectful, like, hey, do you have a minute? Something like that. And then they can let them answer. Usually if they answer the phone, they have the minute because they answered the phone, but I still try to, hey, do you have a minute? And that, if I say, hey, you have a minute, that means I'm about to talk business right then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do something very similar. The way that I generally, so if I'm calling outbound to a vendor, to a client, I try to, in a very short order, hey Ryan, this is Ben. I wanted to see if you had a couple minutes to talk about this, and this. Yeah. Is now a good time? So give them here are the things that we're going to talk about if you have time, because if those things are not on the radar, then they can push you off. But if they have quick minutes, they can talk about that stuff to give them kind of a primer of what you're needing.
Right. And the other thing I'll do is, if it's something that is short and I'm afraid they might think it goes long, I will say, do you have 5 minutes? And I will say that. And this is important for me. When they do that, I handle the call completely different. I give them as little information as I think that they need to make their decision off of. And as soon as it's done, I say, okay, thank you. And I get off the phone with them to train that mentality that when Ryan calls, he says, do you have 5 minutes? It's going to be really short, really hard. And I've actually had people go, whoa, okay, hold on. Let's take 15 minutes to delve through this here. And it's like, okay, that's fine. I just wanted you to know that I'm prepared fully to give you what I think I can give you in 5 minutes and get off and get out of your hair. And I've gotten a pretty good response both ways. A, the 5 minutes work well, and B, people going, actually, we need longer for this, but they appreciate the fact that I tried to pack it into 5 minutes.
I think it's really valuable to mention and to just point out that if you give that pitch and you say that, you cannot go more than 5 minutes. If you ask someone,
without their permission.
Right. Yeah. But if you ask somebody for 5 minutes and they give you 5 minutes, you can't take 9 minutes. But at the 5 minute mark, if you stop and they say, all right, I've got another 10, let's dive in. That's your lead in to have take as much time as they'll give you. But if you make a commitment on the front end, because I've had people say, hey, I just need 5 minutes of your time. And then they launch into a 7, 8, 10 minute pitch. And I'm sitting there like, what just happened? You told me you needed 5. We're now at 8. And now I have to be the one in the position to get you off the phone. And that's not a position you want to put the person you're reaching out to in.
Right. Yep. So no, that's so with that being said, let's kind of go back to the genesis here, because it sounds like the genesis was in meeting versus the phone, the email, and all of that. Just the general premise, because we've touched on this a couple different ways here. How good do you feel like you're with reading people? We'll take email out, because email is probably the most formal way we communicate still today. Phone and text, or I don't know if you do a lot of Skype or Zoom conferences or whatever besides this, but phone, text, or video conferences versus being there in the moment. Just personal evaluation. How good do you feel like you are reading the room? I feel like I'm in a meeting. I can watch the person. They start tapping the desk. They kind of lean back, whatever. There's certain cues that I'm sitting there going, okay, this is the ripcord moment. On the phone, maybe from your feedback, I am a little quick on the trigger, or maybe I don't necessarily think that we should go any further for various reasons, but I'm willing to concede it's both. How do you feel that you do with that?
At the end of the day, there's no substitute for face-to-face. There just isn't. You can read body language and nonverbal cues so much better. I mean, I happen to talk with my hands a lot, and so when you're on the podcast and I'm talking, you can see a lot of jazz hands. But that's but but it kind of scales back, right? So face to, I mean, it's relatively generic, but face to face, I think there's truly no substitute for that. On a Zoom conference like this, I can read body language just okay, but there's certain things like right now, if you were doing something with your hands, I wouldn't be able to tell so I can't see those and those kind of things.
I know what you're saying. I do. Yeah, right here you can't see my hands. I can't see really below your body. Go ahead. If you picked up your.
Yeah, and no, so to that point, I mean, there's a lot that you can pick up on Zoom conferences, but then scaling back to the next step, I think on the phone you can hear, voice inflection and you can hear those kind of things, but there's a lot of nonverbals that you won't be able to pick up on. And then, unless I have a really established relationship with someone, I very rarely will text them anything more than like critical data type of things. And what I mean by that is because I found so many times, even just the most generic language can be misconstrued on text, and I just don't like. I don't like to even have that take that chance. And so I'm more than happy to pick up the phone, and even if it's leaving a voicemail, I usually do that. And I've actually sometimes I will depending on again on the context of the relationship, but I'll send somebody a voice memo through text, just so they can hear my voice, because that in and of itself, it's still text, but they're at least getting where I'm coming from a lot more cleanly.
I was about to ask you if you use the voice memo. I don't like it much in iPhone, the one that's built in there, because it goes away and you can't really control it much. It's really kind of touch and go. Just for the listeners, WhatsApp is the premium service for all things texting. WhatsApp can sponsor the show as well. But voice memos.
We do need to get into that Facebook money. That's a good idea. Get in that Facebook money. That's where the money's at, right?
They can run whatever propaganda ads they want to about this show. But yeah, I thought about the voice memo things, using it more. I use it some in WhatsApp. I know you mentioned Will. Me and him will send them, especially if we're driving or something. It's so easy just to send them. And they're a lot better in there than they are in the native iMessage chat. But voice memos, something I have thought about going a little bit more to as time goes on, because you're right. Like I give you an example. I send off, sometimes I'll want to use an exclamation point and I'll put a question mark. I think I sent this to you the other day maybe, and you're kind of making fun of me. Obviously, you know what I meant. But if I'd recorded the voice memo, there would have been no doubt what I meant. And I don't think in that context it was debatable, but I have had them where I meant to hit the exclamation point, I hit the question mark. It was kind of like, it could have gone either way, and it's like, God, that was, that's, I don't know why I pressed that button, but I did, and I hit send, and then you can't undo it on iMessage. So there's that. But we have one more topic to talk about, and this might be the most important topic we've ever discussed on this show. And what I mean by that is, are we going to do, not we, I do them, do you do read receipts or not for text messages? Emails, I don't do them. I will tell you why if you want to know. But text, I do them. I love them. They are my life.
I'm turning the tables around on you. I want you to set the table here, because I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like having read receipts on is a counterintuitive stance, as opposed to, I think people, I would imagine that most people, and I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I would imagine that the norm, quote unquote, is to have read receipts turned off. So why do you find it valuable? Is it something that you find is valuable for you inwardly, or is it something more outward to the people that are, that are receiving those read receipts? How do you look at that?
Well, I look at it like, once I've opened that text message, they're going to know that I've opened it. Assuming, obviously, it's iMessage or WhatsApp. iMessage, the Android doesn't work, not that I know of at least. But, yeah, they know that I've read it, and I want people to know that when I read their message, I'm going to respond. That's a big deal for me. I try to be pretty prompt, depending on what's going on, depending on when I will do it. The other thing is, if I leave, which gives me two options, really. So if I have a read receipt on, and the message pops up, Bob Smith texts you or whatever, and I know there's a read receipt there, I've got two options. A, I can leave it unread, or B, I can go try to read it. And sometimes when you open it up, it's already on Bob's thing, so it's read. So it kind of creates this tension. Do I go see what Bob sent me right now? If I go and see, he's going to know that I've read it. Therefore, I might need to respond. And so it creates kind of this process of trying to make sure that I respond to people. Whereas if it's turned off, like with email, I can open it. I can't unread an email that a text or WhatsApp. I can unread an email. I can put it back to unread. So it kind of starts this chain of pressure that makes me respond. And responding to people is really important to me. I like it when people respond to me. It makes you, it makes you feel good. Someone took the time to respond to you. You're appreciative. They took they didn't have to, and they did. And so, for me, it creates this burden to respond to people. And from the moment I get it, do I actually open up the application? Because the application could take me straight to the text message. And so I have to work through all that. What's going on in my life? Am I busy? Do I have time for this? And so maybe I'm crazy in that regard, but it's a big deal. And I'm not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but I really try to make sure that when I go to check a text, there's that burden that they're going to see that I read it and I need to respond. And if I forget, I'm gonna look like an idiot because they saw that I read it 2 days ago. I never responded. I mean, I look like an idiot anyways. I'll just save you that easy zinger there. But that's kind of my method.
Can you not do my job for me? I mean, come on. At least let me drive the bus over you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I could almost just kind of reverse what you said and tell you that's my stance. I think that I think that it's somewhat, for me, a pushback on this idea that when somebody else wants or needs my time, I'm compelled to give it to them right then. I think there's something to be said for, like you said, so if you read a text and there's a read receipt on, they now know you've read that. And, there are a lot of times where I find myself, I'll read a text and I'll need a few hours to think about my response, or I want to think through a response, or I want the time to be able to make a couple of phone calls and get back to them without them without them having been like, he read it at 11:28 a.m. It's now 4:15. What's going on? More than that though, and this is a very personal thing, and I think I've said this to you before. I don't think I've said it on air yet, and I don't say it to very many people, but I'll put it out there. It's probably very counterintuitive to most everyone that knows me, especially in my professional capacity, my professional life. But I'm fiercely introverted as a person, just to my core of my own personal life. And so what that means to me is that there's times where I just kind of need to be offline and allow myself to process things a little bit more differently, or maybe a little bit longer than some others may need to. And I work around that and I adjust to that, and I don't find it a detractor on a daily basis. But I say that to say there's times where I don't feel compelled to respond to a text right away. And to your point, I don't want someone else to think, it's been a day or been a day and a half since he clearly read this, he must not care, because it's almost always not that. It's just that I don't have the bandwidth at the moment, or I want to give it some thought, or I'm just not in a headspace where I'm ready to respond at the moment. And none of those three things, I don't think those three things are negatives. I think that's just a personal quirk and a personal choice. That being said, if there's something that somebody sends me that needs a response, they're going to get a prompt response. One of the other things I was curious about, if you can answer this as well, in addition to responding to what I just said, but I don't know if they can do it on Android, but on iPhones at least, when you get a text message like on your home screen on the home screen, you can set it so that you can actually read the text, or you can set it so that it just says iMessage, and so you can't actually read the actual body of the text. I used to have it so that you could read the text, but over the last couple, I think I changed it about maybe 2-3 months ago. I changed it to where all I can see now is where it says iMessage, because that compels me to open the phone and look at the message, and so that's my own kind of self-correction of kind of what you're talking about. But it's like on my line, it's on my side, it's offline to someone else. So, but it's keeping me accountable, because actually you sent me a text. I think you sent me a text on like Tuesday or Wednesday that it turned out like you needed a response right then, but I was in the middle of something, and I could, even if I had read it, I wouldn't have been able to respond right away. But it would have been helpful for me to know, hey, I got to get on this, I got to answer this, as opposed to I think I answered you like 6 or 7 hours later when I had a break. And what do you think about that?
So to your first point about the pressure, one of the things that I've done is, as I mentioned, when you open that app, sometimes they might be the text that it goes to, depending on where your setting was. So if it's something I can't get to, I can send back a message that says, hey, can I respond to you back in 4 hours about this? Which then will prompt them to say yes, which means I will just back out of the text where I got all my text on the screen and just exit the app. And so then respond back, it's sitting there. And I can go and I can look at all my texts at one time and see if they say yes or no without actually reading it. Then it's there as a reminder. I know I'm crazy, man. I'm crazy. But that's how it works. I got so many emails that sit there that I mark unread, and I don't go back and act on them because there's not that pressure of it being there. And so, yeah, it's a flaw of mine, I'm happy to say. I'm sure Nate, as he's editing this, goes sitting there going, good God, I know of all the emails I've sent him, he's never responded to. But the WhatsApp, the text messages, those get me to act. And I'll say this, and this is not this is not an attaboy story. This is something that made me feel pretty bad. I have a friend in South Africa, and he was traveling to Europe, and he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I lost my phone. I got to get a new one. My WhatsApp will be back in a day or two," or something like that. I read the email, and I never responded. I just saw it and thought, okay, whatever. Sure. A week goes by, or 2 weeks go by. He goes back, whatever it was. He goes back to Africa, and he's like, we talk about whatever we had to talk about. And he goes at the end, he goes, "Hey, I want you to know I was really disappointed. I sent you that email, and you didn't respond. You're so," he's like, "you always respond to everything I say, and you didn't respond to this one email." And I thought I had, to be honest with you, but I didn't. And I think it was just because I treat email differently than I do text or WhatsApps. And I treat them so differently that I don't do a good enough job on staying on the email. So for me, it's kind of a checks and balances. I know I'm deficient on email. I need to get better at that. But when it comes to this, I always tell clients, if you need anything 24/7, 365, this is on me. Call me, text me, whatever. And so it's kind of ingrained that if it's coming directly to the bat line, if you will, that I'm going to try to get it. And speaking of, I got a text right here. It's driving me crazy. I hadn't checked, but it's there. I'm like, I need to check that. Whereas the emails, I'm like, I'll get to them next month.
So to your point, I'm actually curious. I don't know if you and I have talked about this before. Let me pull up my email here. Let me give you an actionable or an accurate count, I should say. So yeah, currently I've got 31 emails that are quote unquote marked as unread in my inbox. But I have relatively recently, I'm trying to think of when, maybe the last year or so, I've almost started to use my email inbox as a to-do list. And what I mean by that is I will keep the important emails that I need to act on as unread. So like there are email chains that have 20, 30 email responses in them that I will then revert back to kicking them to unread, because then each morning or whenever I'm trying to check things off, or when I'm trying to find action items, all I need to do is look at maybe my Dropbox and then my email inbox, and right now I've got 31. I've got 31 emails that are either the ball's in my court or they're important enough to be up there for some reason or another, right? And so I kind of use that as almost like again, like you're talking about, kind of like a checks and balances of like what needs to happen and what do I need to respond to, because I find that with texting, I have a kind of and to be candid, I guess I have a short bandwidth and a short attention span for texts, in the sense that I'm not gonna have long-winded exchanges via text. If you have more than like 2 or 3 very surface level questions from me, it better be in an email or a phone call. I'm not gonna just hammer away and type pages long texts. And so I think to that point, I think one of the other reasons that I tend to respond to texts in a different tack, in the sense that I'll take more time, etc., is that I'm kind of actually, I guess I hadn't thought about this until I'm saying it out loud, but I guess maybe on some level, I'm almost trying to train the other person of, listen, text is for really quick back and forth. And if you need me, I'm here. But if you need something substantive, pick up the phone or shoot me an email, because that's where the more long-winded stuff happens. Do you agree with that, or do you find yourself? There's
no doubt the training portion is true. And I would say we can kind of end it on this note, is no matter what you're doing, whether you're doing it like I am, or like Ben is, or like whoever, you are training people. There are certain people that I know, once I've texted with them a handful of times, I get their pattern. Some people will send a burst of 3, 4, 5 one-liners in a row. Some people will send big, long explanations. Some people won't respond for 2 or 3 days. Some people will ignore 4 in a row, and then they'll respond to the 5th. So you are, I think what you said about training people, everyone's training someone in their ways they communicate. And so I think that's, I think you're dead on the money there. But the email thing, I'm learning more techniques. And one thing I've learned since we talked last is, over the last couple of weeks, is something that's been around for a while. I've just been an idiot and hadn't realized it. I'll save a lot of articles and I'll put them in my Safari on my iPhone, and then I forget about it. I have like 500 Safari articles opened up. Well, what I learned is instead of opening something in Safari, you can open it into Notes. And then once you open it in Notes, they're right there on your Mac. I just got a Mac the last couple of months, so I'm new to Mac. But they're on the Mac, which means now I can go to my Mac and boom, there's my notes with all this. So, if I could get the emails where I could get that to kind of sort itself out, I'll really be able to get something done by 2022, 2023, some of that time frame. But that was something I just recently found out because I never had a Mac computer until, again, the last couple of months. And so now it's like, oh, okay, well, that's a nice handy shortcut there that I did not know existed.
Absolutely. And for those of you that are listening that are not drinking the Apple Kool-Aid and do not have iPhones, you can do the exact same thing. I actually use, even though I have an iPhone, I do the same thing, but I use Evernote. You can save articles directly into Evernote. Ryan looks dejected for some reason. Unclear why. I'm going to give him the floor in a second. Or maybe he just looks dejected as normal. I don't know. Maybe that's just kind of what happens on Monday around 3:30.
Both. I Evernote. I've used it some. I've tried to use it. It's just, I think the notes are a lot cleaner, a lot more effective. Evernote, maybe I'm just not good enough at it. I've tried it several times. I just never been able to get in there and use it more than like a day. It's just like, oh God, looks like it's built before the Commodore 64. I mean, it's just not, I don't know. The notes are more effective. I don't know.
I like that. Before the Commodore 64. That was good. That was a good reference. I wasn't expecting that. That was good.
All right. We will be at NAPE this week. If you're in Houston, hit Ben or myself up. We'll be there. We'd love a rating and review in iTunes to help spread the word about the show. Ben, anything else before we get out of here today?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to a good week. Like you said, if there's people listening that are around, let's grab coffee, get to know each other a little bit better. You can find us on LinkedIn, and I guess I'm going to let you do the rest of the promo.
Yep, and I would say we'd have a guest next week, but at this point, with Nate's 0 for 3 today, it's no promises. Ben and I might be here. We'll see if that even happens next week. Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, Oil and Gas Contractors Connect, and Energy Week Podcast all have new episodes dropping this week. This show and all of those are in iTunes, Google Play, and all the great iHeartRadio, Spotify, all the great spots that you can find the podcast at. Ben, it was good show today, and we will be back next week.